Hello once again, and welcome back to Herd Immunity News. I'm Marcus Botza. Today, I've got the great delight in welcoming on the UKIP interim leader, Nick Tenconi. Now, Nick has very kindly agreed to come onto our platform, despite the man being flat out and busy, organising peaceful events and coordinating exactly the type of things that you would like to see in the UK, all in accordance with law. But without further ado, can I say, how are you, sir?
Hi, Mark. I'm okay. Thank you very much for having me on. Yeah, I'm okay. Obviously, very, very concerned about all those people in the UK at the moment who have been caught up in what's going on and in the crossfire with Starmer's new approach to handle what he perceives to be political dissidents. Um, Living in Britain, it's just absolutely heartbreaking, devastating to see what's going to happen to those people who potentially weren't directly involved in criminality, but were there, for example, at that time. Obviously, criminality is criminality. That which isn't needs to be looked at in a different way, circumstances, etc., etc. You're going to see a lot more of this of people getting not just involved and caught up, but also who are essentially innocent, but also people who don't really understand what they're involved in either, and the sentencing and the sort of harshness that we're going to see as well. We all knew this was coming. Marxist Labour getting into power. We all knew this was going to happen. It's just devastating. It really is, because 99% is, and I'm happy to talk more with you about this, is peaceful, and it is the concerns are legit. Those concerns are legitimate as well with regards to some of the topics I'm sure we'll cover off on. So yeah, it's a difficult time, and it's a very, very sad time in Britain, and it's probably going to get worse. But good always comes out of bad. So
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely, Nick. Now, we know, those of us that follow politics in the United Kingdom know that there was a leadership change. Lewis Perry survived 34 days as leader of UKIP. Now, UKIP, of course, is the mothership for the Brexit movement. Obviously Nigel Farage, being in his involvement, that was his platform until things went awry, just about the Brexit vote time, sadly, and he went off and formed the Brexit Party. But if you could just, for our viewers and listeners' benefit, please tell them a little bit about yourself, please, Nick.
sure. So around the time of November 2019, so Wuhan, I being on the front line with regards to what I do commercially. So I'm in B2C business. So you're at the sharp end when it comes to dealing with customers, and you hear things, and the Wuhan situation. Who knew what that would turn into? But I forecasted, not really predicated on anything, but something didn't smell right. Now, fast forward to lockdown when Boris gave his speech at the end of March 20th, I want to say, in 2020. And I was sat with a group of people, and those people had their phones blowing up, and their parents were saying, or their partners were saying, "Come home now," martial law. So I knew what was coming, but that no one's ever going to forget where they were when Boris Johnson did that. So things didn't look right, they didn't smell right. But what's crucial to explain, when someone says, "How did you get involved and why are we here?" At that time, I also was an ordinary citizen, not liberal, always been right wing, socially conservative, Christian, socially conservative. Always spoken my mind. I guess that's called being opinionated, which obviously in the liberal circles doesn't wash, that doesn't fly, etc. So all these people like me, you kind of feel like you're the black sheep because you've got something to say, and a lot of the time you feel you're not heard or you're not listened. So that the temptation is, and I guess I'm guilty of this, is that you're just an ordinary citizen who doesn't necessarily say or do too much or puts their head above the parapet. And I guess that brings us into the field of activism. So I didn't see myself as an activist. In terms of giving you the longer story about my background, yeah, I've been in and out of politics for a very long time, since I was about 17 years old. I studied it as well alongside a few other bits and pieces. But during lockdown, I saw the Save the Children and Unite for the Children campaigns, and I'd watch these people, and I'd watch organizations like Turning Point, who would use graphics to send a message predominantly to the working class to say that you have a voice and that we understand your concerns and we hear your concerns. And all this stuff just came out during the summer of 2020. There's this giant psyop that was happening, and everyone who was asleep became awoken. And so we started to talk about being awake. All these different protests, anti-lockdown protests. I was nothing to do with any of that. I was watching, I was learning, I was listening. And then I realized there was this term called woke. So now I find myself in the thick of it, calling out radical Islam, calling out communism, calling out far left extremism, calling out Marxism. These are all things I knew about. I was an ordinary citizen who was just going about my business. Didn't have kids in school, so I wasn't seeing the indoctrination there. Don't live in areas where the grooming gangs were operating, where Albanian drug gangs are operating, etc. etc. All these little clues that give you an indication that society is headed south in a really dramatic and devastating satanic way. So again, it's kind of bubble living, but I wasn't an idiot. I wasn't unaware of it. There was Turning Point's graphics that I saw. I thought, well, this is kind of adding up. This is making sense. Guys like Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, Candace Owens. Let's listen to these people. Let's see what they've got to say. That's how it start the conversation. So by the end of 2020, and what I had to go through in that period, I wasn't furloughed. All my bills kept coming, but I wasn't allowed to go and work. The hysteria, the panic, the beta male sort of cucked approach to life. And if you were a dissident at that time of what was going on and you were questioning it, then you were a Nazi or you were an outcast or whatever. I'm not going to queue up at Tesco's. I'm not going to wear a mask. I'm not going to abide by whatever. And there's lots of different things. The propaganda of fear campaign, the shaming, pure evil. People had legitimate concerns. So by the end of 2020, I knew I had to get back involved and do something, knowing what my skill set looks like and what I can potentially achieve. And then from summer 2021, I'd made all the relevant inquiries to all the relevant parties and organizations to establish which was far right, which was liberal, which was ethno-nationalist, because I have my red lines, and Turning Point, which was a very common sense, right-wing, culturally, socially conservative, kind of Christian focused. But that, obviously that's, you're not going to find that very easily nowadays, but that's very important to me, which I'm sure we'll go on to talk about. And there's this organization there, just sat there. And I thought, well, I'll speak to them as well. So I did. A few months later, as you'll know, and everyone else will be aware, by the autumn of 2021, I was made Chief Operations Officer of Turning Point UK, which makes me responsible for the day-to-day operational outfit itself. And of course, the idea, as I'm sure most people know by now, with Turning Point was to make sure that at universities, these left-wing Marxist indoctrination camps had a presence like ours, like you see Turning Point USA do, to say to those patriots, small c conservatives, Christians, whatever you want to call them, we get you, we hear you, and we're going to send the message to the British public of Marxist indoctrination happening in our universities. And that was it. And then that took us to the beginning of 2023. That was all we did. Among a lot of other things, for the purpose of this interview, that's what we did. And then we began our street movement in 2023 in February, sorry. We heard about Drag Queen Story Hour that was happening in our local pubs and things like that, etc. That's where a man, he's going to be a homosexual, dresses scantily clad and reads to children. And the problem with that is that this is a ticketed event where parents can pay to put their children in front of this filth. So we were in two minds because of liberalism and liberal economics. It's kind of like, well, if you want to go and do that, that's between you and what happens within your circles and your families, because it's shameful and it's disgusting. But if you, in a free market, if you want to do that, so we really weighed it up and looked at it, and we thought, you know what? We'll talk to the residents in the area. This particular area, this pub was in Lewisham in London. We'll talk to those people. We'll understand what their concerns are and what they think and feel. And it turns out there's a massive far left presence in Lewisham, but there's also a very common sense, family orientated presence there as well. And they reached out to us when we advertised about this that was going on at this particular pub. And they were absolutely outraged when they came to us saying, why is this happening? This shouldn't be happening. This isn't right. This isn't appropriate. So we listened, as always, no different from now with UKIP. We listened to what common sense, working class, ordinary families are saying about what's happening in their area. So we launched that movement in February of last year. And eventually Drag Story Hour at that pub at that time got closed down. Obviously, I don't know about now, but it got closed down as a result of community action standing up to it's far left stuff, but it's let's call it what it is. It's evil. And then after that, after October 7th, when we saw Islamists glorify and salute the murder, rape, and destruction of all those innocent lives and those souls after October 7th. That jubilation took place, if you'll remember, you've seen the footage, on October 9th, before Israel had issued a response. So I'm not keen to go down the rabbit hole of who's to blame when it comes to warfare. I put Britain and Christianity first. So I'm happy to talk more about that. But we took on the Islamists at the Cenotaph on Whitehall as turning point. And we said, we're not going to be intimidated by Islamist mob behavior. And we saw that they were going to jump on statues, desecrate statues. We saw that two-tier policing was coming in to enable and facilitate and embolden the Islamists. So again, Turning Point, as an activist organization, mobilizes numbers, and we step up to be the voice of the unheard, and also to defend that which we deem to be correct in defense. And then after that, we carried on going after and calling out Islamist activity and Islamist thuggery and mob behavior when we saw the call for the rise of Muslim armies and the call for jihad, the call for the annihilation of Jews in Israel, etc. Very complicated stuff, but there's clear red lines here when it comes to morality. And there's a number of other things as well in that. And then that brings us to the start of this year, where UKIP approached me and said, look, we're really interested in you. And I said, that's great, because I'm about to sever my relationship with the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party wanted me gone because left-wing radicals within the party were trying to block me from progressing any further within the Tories, which we knew would happen. It's very sad, but it is what it is with regards to the party. That's fine. So I was severing my relationship with the Conservative Party at that time. That UKIP approached me. So I thought, well, I need to re-go over their manifesto. I need to re-go over their policies. I need to re-go over the history in the last 8 years, which I'm sure we're going to go on to talk about. And I need to decide whether it's a party that's worth my time and effort. Policy and manifesto wise, it's rock solid. I mean, it's fantastic. And everyone knows in the political bubble, everyone knows that other parties, no names mentioned, take their policies and their stance from UKIP because it's the most socially conservative right-wing party. And I was really, really happy and really, really flattered, frankly, to be named as Lois's deputy, which takes us to about April, if I remember correctly, of this year, Mark. And now here we are. And I'm sure you've got some questions about how that transpired.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, it's thank you very much for going into that quite detailed journey. I'm sure you could do even more detail, but we're limited for time, Nick. But yeah, that gives people a pretty good understanding of who you are and what your priorities are. And the next real line of questioning that I have for you right now is how you balance the two-tier policing, whether or not you agree with the fact that the UK has two-tier policing or not. We'll let you answer that in your own words. But how you balance the concerns that you have over certain ideologies, political ideologies or religious ideologies, how you balance that with the accusations of things like xenophobia, Islamophobia, homophobia, and staying true to your cause. How do you balance that?
So it's very important to note that the Socialist Worker Party, which hosts the pro-Palestine parades that we see, organizations like Hope Not Hate, organizations like Stand Up to Racism, these organizations are all far left extremist organizations. They're all Marxist based, and they have clever names like Socialist Worker Party, like Stand Up to Racism, like Unite Against Fascism. And they're all fun. No one knows exactly but it's funded by trade union money. And the expose on that will come out in due course. It's a difficult one to find, but it will come out. So people don't need to take my word for it. People aren't silly. They're going to ask where the money comes from. Now, when we were defending childhood innocence against Drag Queen Story Hour, we noticed that from the get-go, there were 400 to 500 lefties in the mob, all wearing balaclavas or masked up, and they would always shout racist at us. They would always shout Nazi or bigot or fascist. And I remember thinking to myself, I've learned a lot in the last 18 months, Mark, but I remember thinking to myself at that time, we don't think that homosexual men dress scantily clad as a woman, impersonating a woman, should be reading to children. What's race got to do with this? What's Nazism got to do with it? What's bigotry got to do with it? And we went back week after week after week to confront these people at that. And anyone can find this. If you just put Drag Queen Story Hour protest Lewisham into Google or YouTube or wherever, you'll see reams and reams of footage of Socialist Worker Party sponsored banners, sponsored placards. And I knew about the Socialist Worker Party being an activist and being COO of Turning Point. It's very difficult to follow every single organization and know everything about them and who funds them and what their modus operandi is. Well, I learned more and more about the Socialist Worker Party and Stand Up to Racism. Diane Abbott, who's a racist, she's the president of Stand Up to Racism as well. So you start to find out all these different things about all these people. Going back to my initial intro, people aren't necessarily awake to any of these things. Then after October 7th, we see these marches, and all you can see in these marches, just like with the far left pro illegal immigrant defense that we're seeing across the UK, you see the sticks and you see the placards and you see the Socialist Worker Party. They're absolutely everywhere. And I can tell you also about a protest that happened in Aldershot the other night, and there was no far right protest, there was no ethno-nationalism, but they still turned up, and it's all sponsored by the Socialist Worker Party. So it's very important to note that first and foremost. You've got all these far left organizations who are sort of backed up and emboldened and facilitated by the government in terms of the rhetoric. Also, the mainstream media do it as well. There's no question about their funding or what their purpose is whatsoever. So it's very important to call this out. To answer your question, how do we balance what we're trying to achieve with the enemy that we're up against? Because this enemy, this is funded. It's facilitated and emboldened by the mainstream media and by the government. So after the latest protest, where I went to defend the working class who have legitimate concerns over illegal immigration, now, of course, I get the abuse and I get the hatred and the racist accusation, because after what happened in 2020, liberal minds, regardless of religion, regardless of skin color, bank balance, demographic, liberal minds and those who are godless and without purpose, they have bought into the weaponization of race, psyop. They've bought in. So it's okay to be a race baiter. This has been allowed and legitimized and normalized. So the people need to understand that the enemy that we face, the balance which you mentioned to be struck, is, of course, we must go out and peacefully protest with regards to illegal immigration, with mass uncontrolled migration, and with the fact that we've got a massive issue with radical Islamic terrorism, Islamist mobs, two-tier policing. So you say about the balance. Well, the balance is to peacefully protest, safety in numbers. And actually what we really need to do is we need to reignite the Christian community and give them a bit of a telling off at the moment that it's very important that their voices are heard. And the balance that needs to be struck is very, very, it's difficult to describe at the moment. There's nothing wrong with peacefully protesting, whether you're talking about the government or your local council, or if you've got concern with knife crime in your area, if you're concerned for the safety of women and children, your own family members in the area. There's absolutely nothing wrong with treading that line. And by definition, you're not inciting, you're not doing anything inflammatory. We all know what's coming under Labour. I was just checking this morning to see what's the latest definition of Islamophobia and what Keir Starmer is going to try to...
Indeed, and you're out on the streets of Aldershot and Broadmoor. You're out with the community there, and we get great footage of you with a lot of people behind you, and they're talking, from what we can see, in peaceful tones. Now, we, as a little platform, we repudiate all violence. Both you and I would say that these people, and we couldn't identify with anyone setting fire to anything. But when we look at two-tier policing and two-tier reporting, I'm sure you're aware of the barracks that were set on fire in 2021. Now, these were by a group of asylum seekers. This is all reported on the verified BBC, so it must be true. And the police in Kent at the time said that no, this will not be treated as a riot. Now, surely we're also seeing a councillor. I'm sure you saw the Labour councillor speaking on the streets of London, and he was calling for throats to be cut. Now, some people can laugh this off, but surely if other people are like Bernice Tweets, for example, she a 55-year-old put in prison for posts online, compare it to Labour councillors that are calling for throats to be cut. Where does this policing go, and how do you contain the frustration and fury, perhaps, within the groups of people you're leading?
So I think there's a number of things that have come to light now. So Labour MP Lauren Edwards, I think she's Labour. There's a tweet from her. I've got it here actually from 2009. I won't swear on the platform, but she's I want these.
You can if you want.
I want, this is a quote from Lauren Edwards. I want these effing Estonian retards out of my flat now. We've got Wes Streeting from 2009. There would be nothing natural about Jan Moir's death if I shoved the bigoted old bag under a train. Considering starting my own vigilante organization to push nasty people under trains. First up, Jan Moir, followed by Gert Wilders. I could go on. I've got all the screenshots. So what are we dealing with here now? So we knew what was coming with Stasi Starmer. Okay. So Labour has alienated the working class. It's alienated the Red Wall, patriots, Christian conservatives. So Labour's done with all of those old school Labour demographics who were economically in the middle or left, but socially they were they were right wing. So in terms of answering your question, and you've got some really great questions there, and they're all quite complicated, so I'll try to unpack it. Keir's obviously got some agenda going on. He knows what he's doing. Whether he's mass importing and going to continue to mass import the voter base or not, whether he's identified that the vast majority of general elections have been votes of no confidence because the vast majority of people don't vote. The only people that do vote are the community block votes work very well, and that typically works with the Lib Dem areas and with predominantly Islamic areas as well. So maybe he's worked that out and he's thought to himself, I just need to alienate everyone because it doesn't matter as long as I've got those votes. Maybe he's done the math on that. I don't know. So you look at all
sorry
these,
to interrupt, Nick, but Rishi Sunak's played his part and the Conservatives have played their part by making themselves unelectable.
We need to face fact. We're talking about 24 years of nonsense. So you've got Tony Blair's reign of terror from 97 to 07, and then you've got 14 years of Tory. So let's just call it what it is. People talk about the two-party system. It's not a two-party system. It's a three-party system. We mustn't forget the Liberal Democrats in there either.
On we go. You're talking about they're talking about the way that we can deal with this in a positive light, solutions-based. We know we're in trouble, but from leadership like yourself and parties like UKIP, we need to say that we're in trouble right now, but it's not irrecoverable.
Yes. Precisely. So you mentioned in your question about two-tier policing. So what we've outrage culture, and you mentioned about sympathy for people, again, in your question where things are spilling over the top. Now is the time for peace and for unity. That is it. It is time for Christians to once again find their voice and vote in line with their faith. So it does exhaust me talking about outrage culture because we have to be solutions focused. We must. And of course, 99% of things at the moment is analysis and critique and outrage, which is fine. But once you understand something, you can control it, or you can do whatever you like with it if you choose to. And so people are going to have to start asking themselves the question, is Reform and is Nigel the savior that everyone paints him out to be. So people are going to have to start asking themselves that question, because if the forecast is correct, and Nigel and Reform want the Tory party, they want the centre ground, they want the middle ground, hence nonsense terms like centre right and all this other stuff, just to dilute and water down. So you're kind of one of us, but you're also sort of safe and in your little liberal bubble, etc. You've already got three parties who essentially encapsulate that vote. So Reform either are going to be the voice for those people who so desperately need it at the moment with their legitimate concerns, or they're not. And dollars to donuts, they're not going to be. So people are very quickly going to have to start working out and all this math and pick a side. Now, I know it because it's right there in front of us, but it's a slow burn process for people to understand that actually maybe what they thought would be the savior and the white knight, maybe, just maybe, actually, that's not the case at all. Which kind of links back to what you were mentioning about UKIP and me being here. You're talking about massive civil concern, massive civil fear. These people are paralyzed. You call them working class or patriots. They're paralyzed by fear. Going back to your point about two-tier policing and about the ability of free speech, you were essentially talking about the
ability to speak about mass immigration and unfettered migrants coming into the country and creating havoc.
This is as satanic and as evil as it gets now. This was always going to be Starmer's plan. He's going to conflate race with religion. So it's a very important point that, if you'll permit me, I'll just spend a minute talking about. This is why I mentioned about the Socialist Worker Party and Hope Not Hate and Stand Up to Racism. They call anyone who challenges illegal immigration, anyone who challenges knife crime, anyone who challenges mass uncontrolled immigration, anyone who challenges open border policy, anyone who challenges the woke mind virus, anyone who challenges our kids being indoctrinated in the most nefarious and insidious of manners, anyone who challenges that is not just a Nazi and a bigot, because no one really believes that. No one really believes that. The ordinary liberal doesn't believe that. But what they do 99% of the time is call you a racist. That's all they've got to do. So we haven't forgotten about the BLM riots in 2020. Surely we haven't forgotten about that. We haven't just moved on and we're all just focusing now on Islamist mobs and Islamist thugs and Islamic terror. And of course, far left totalitarian propaganda, which props up the Islamist regime. We haven't just switched to that, have we? We haven't forgotten about that time. I'm inundated now with people calling me a racist because I don't want open borders, because I want to talk about radical Islam and its problems, because I want to talk about illegal immigrants being housed at the taxpayer expense. I want to talk about mainstream media cover-ups of every time there's a terrorist attack, it's mental health issues by the individual, and it's not actually a terrorist attack. Or every time there's a terrorist attack, or every time someone, or God forbid, people are slain, the guy has got mental health issues. I want to have these conversations about the most heinous, most awful crimes and the psychological warfare being propagated onto our citizens, ordinary concerned citizens who are holding down two jobs, who are exhausted, who are tired, who are trying to raise a family and pay their mortgage. Whilst on top of that, they're labeled a racist. Remember that that's the key thing here. It's the weaponization of race, which of course both the Labour and the Conservative government have facilitated. They've emboldened, and they've made sure that Keir now can get to this point where he's about to conflate race with religion. Okay, Islam is a religion. It's not a race. And they're about to bring in, God forbid, but it looks like it, Islamophobia laws. And that needs to be unpacked. So I'll wait for your next question, but I'll happily unpack that for your viewers and what the solution is. Again, I don't want to go down the outrage path. We have to understand what's what, but we have to have solutions on top of it as well. So,
yeah, the two-tier policing cannot be ignored. There's just no point now. It's official. There's Elon Musk, the Twitter owner, or ex-owner, has come on in on this. That he's gone toe-to-toe with Starmer. Really, they're looking to even arrest him. Some of the talking heads have come out. I mean, he obviously doesn't know anything about the First Amendment. in America, they do have these freedoms to speak out. But when there's the conflation that we see from the legacy media in the UK, that they're going for a catch-all. It's not just racism or Islamophobia or homophobia. All these things are tying in together. You're calling for unity in a fractured UK, which is fed on ESG and DEI directives. How can you ever be unified when you're promoting diversity and diversion from a Christian faith? But I mean, the Christian faith now they're kind of running in tandem, aren't they? The breakdown and fracturing of society and the indoctrination of our young with the relentless attack on the Christian faith. And it's not just Jews who are being attacked. They get most of the press because of the riots and marches in London. But where I am in Scotland, churches are absolutely being crunched and munched down to nothing. Less so in the Catholic faith. They still have the Il Papa. They still have the Vatican, the strength of that. But can you see a direct link? And we're going a slightly different direction, but you've touched on it, between the destruction of Christianity and the war against Christianity and what Starmer and the civil service want to roll out in this country.
Yeah, so I suppose now we get into the thick of it. So in terms of the outrage and the analysis, let me offer an opinion here. In order for modern day communism to flourish, you have to destroy masculinity. You have to destroy testosterone. You have to destroy fathers. You have to destroy the patriarch. You have to destroy Christianity. In order for communism to survive in the digital age, in the tech rev in 2024 at this time, people who know their history. I'm already preaching to the converted. But for those people that don't, the mere fact of my presence in Aldershot the other day, calling out the communists, that's got people really, really upset and riled. That makes me a fascist, apparently, according to the IQ and logic of these people. Calling out far left extremism, calling out communism, calling out far left totalitarian propaganda, that makes me a racist. So it's not just the attack on masculinity, on fathers, on the patriarch, on Christianity. We're in the absolute center of psychological and spiritual warfare. So it's very difficult to say, oh, Keir's got this particular agenda against Christians. It's very difficult to say that Rishi had this particular agenda against Christians. Every single Christian in the UK knows there is an attack on Christianity. And those people that are talking about it very loudly, God bless them. But Christians are going to have to find their voice once again and realize and understand a few different things about where we've gone wrong as a result of the schisms. And I'm not, this interview potentially isn't for that. But what you say is, of course, totally accurate. If you are Christian, that typically means in the West that you're white. Only that's complete nonsense, because Christianity is the most inclusive, the most diverse religion, far more than Islam, And Christianity, obviously, for those people who understand the one true faith, for those people that understand Christianity, we don't care about skin color, and we don't care about who hijacks Christianity for their own end goals or purposes. That's always going to happen. So people need to understand that the mainstream media do nothing for Christianity. Keir Starmer does nothing for Christianity. The Conservative Party do nothing for Christianity. So where UKIP comes in now is that Christianity and faith will be at the heart of everything that we do. So we must talk about, because to talk about the attack on Holy Mother Church and Christianity is so depressing, and it's so sad. And it's the thing is, Mark, it's 2,000 years old. This isn't brand new. The attack on the church. Now, I know that if I'm talking to someone who's on side and who knows their history, obviously you get it. But we must be the voice for the Christian community in the UK, making them aware of the fact that we totally understand the forces of evil and the battalions of Satan's army are encompassing us. But whilst we talk about that, we must push the Christian vote to people to vote in line with their faith and that which is right. And that's, of course, why UKIP's in existence.
Sure. Well, you're echoing President Donald Trump. You're echoing Tucker Carlson, the #1 and most watched journalist in the world right now. You're echoing their sentiments about this being a war, not between right and left, between the forces of good and evil. And one only has to look at, I'll close it off here, but one only has to look at the Olympic Games opening ceremony, the abomination of the desecration of the Last Supper, and looking at there was actually a satanic ritual on stage earlier on the Eurovision, where someone, Bambi Thug, I think her name was. So it really is out there in the open for people to see. This is what you're saying, Nick.
I've had two church leaders contact me in the last 48 hours asking me to come along and give a talk to the parish, and of course I'm on standby to do that. There's lots of things going on in the background, but when it comes to talking about far left extremism, we can have that conversation, and it's digestible, and we can teach people. Again, going back to the vitriol that I'm now receiving on social media, just because I stood with a bunch of patriotic youths, I wasn't even supposed to be there. I was in the area, and I'm not having far left extremism shout them down or whatever. And again, these protests that you see where you've got the Socialist Worker Party and Stand Up to Racism branding, they're all busting. They're all busting. It's all trade union. Go tell that to a lefty. They lose their minds. They can't stand.
And they're 99% white.
Don't get me started. Don't get me started. So people are getting wise. If you want to talk about two-tier policing, people, everyone knows about it now. If you want to talk about radical Islam, everyone knows about it now. If you want to talk about the indoctrination of our university students, the woke mind virus, the fact that are the most vulnerable within society are under attack by uncontrolled mass immigration, knife crime, no one's safe. If you unpack all the evils, we can do that. But the point that you mentioned is the most important one. What we are looking at, when you strip it all back, you're looking at the dismantling of fatherhood, of the patriarch, of masculinity, of an attempt to dismantle testosterone, the patriarch, and Holy Mother Church. Nothing's changed in 2,000 years. It is a direct attack and declaration of war on Christianity via the use of far left totalitarian propaganda. So that's why we call it psychological warfare. So the spiritual warfare, every Christian's aware of that. By definition, of both the Old and the New Testament, by definition, we know about that. If you're Satan, you're not going to wake up each morning and concern yourself with anything other than Holy Mother Church. Of course you're not. You're not going to go after anything else. You're going to go after the one true faith. So the reality is that once you've unpacked and stripped everything back, Christians know it's spiritual warfare, but it's the psychological warfare that we have a duty as patriots and as Christians to inspire and motivate the populace to understand that psychological warfare that's being issued by both the Conservative and the Labour Party, but it's going to intensify under Stasi Starmer. So it's our duty to motivate and inspire through education exactly what that propaganda looks like. And from there, people have the understanding, then they can vote in line with their faith and their beliefs. So we have to be solution orientated about this.
Absolutely. And when we talk about Christianity, one of the few places in the world where Christianity is booming is Africa. And there are amazing African Christians who are looking to reach out to you, to reach out to UKIP, to say, I'm a Christian man or woman. I'm terrified at what's going on in this country. They've seen acts like this over in Africa. They've seen the type of totalitarian regimes. Not that we want to go on about the COVID era, but when you saw the obsession with these people, the zealotry, you see it in the net zero as well. There's another rabbit hole we could go down together. LGBT rights, the late-term abortions that Green Party seem to celebrate like demonic witches, and also pop-up euthanasia centres for people perfectly healthy with mental health. We know you're in the fitness industry as well. You've been a trainer and all those things. But everything you say makes complete sense. And we're zeroing in now in perhaps things that the Reform Party can't do because they're Ofcom regulated. You don't seem to have as many reservations or fears, and that is good. Fortune favours the brave in many cases.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think another point you've made, I think earlier on you mentioned about the balance. You've also said it, but I will say it as well.
Sure.
Protests must be peaceful.
Yes.
I can't. That's clear. I can't call out ethno-nationalism hard enough. I've done that over and over again. I've never related to it. It's never been my cup of tea. It's not my thing.
Tommy Robinson?
In what context? Sorry, Mark.
Well, what are your views on Tommy Robinson?
So I think that's very important as a traditional guy, until you've met a man and shaken him by the hand and looked in the whites of his eye. I think that it's very dangerous to pass comment on anyone, and I've never met him. What I will say is that the journalist work he did in exposing and uncovering the grooming gangs, their origin, their ethnicity, their religion, their crimes, and telling the story and being the voice for those people, thousands and thousands of the most vulnerable within society who had no one to look after them. That expose is mesmerizing. It's mesmerizing to see and obviously all the ex-police at that time and now have come forward in saluting the work done. So it's not just citizen journalists, it's everyone who has contributed to the expose with regards to the grooming gang scandal in the UK. It's mesmerizing and so inspiring to see. But the caveat is that it's been and gone. It's been and gone, and it shouldn't have happened. It should not have happened. So I applaud all journalistic efforts to uncover and expose, whether you call it it's kind of a blend of multiculturalism gone wrong and importing our own destruction and backward medieval Islamist thinking, whereby we've just had it lately, an immigrant, an Islamic immigrant, he's gotten off of jail pretty much about raping a girl because he didn't know that rape was illegal under 16. So unfortunately, where we're headed is to have the same conversation about mass uncontrolled immigration, radical Islam, and importing backward medieval satanic demographics into what was once a peaceful land. So it's a complicated pot, but anyone who's exposing that and uncovering that and being a voice for those victims, I mean, it's incredible, absolutely incredible.
It is, and that's very well said and diplomatic and balanced what you've said. But I introduced Tommy Robinson because he was the figure and the name that caused Gerard Batten, the former leader of UKIP, a hell of a lot of problems. And that was right at the time Nigel Farage separated away. I was at the last VIP gala dinner when Farage gave his last speech in Birmingham, I think it was, of all places. Birmingham, when you look at it now, streets, pandemonium. But this was the moment where a lot of people either went with Farage and the Brexit Party, or they said, no, I'm sorry, you've crossed the political Rubicon now. But the thing is about unity, and when you're out on the streets, I'm sure you do all you can, even just to talk about knife crime, to talk about keeping people safe. As exactly what an airport does. They want to know who's coming in and out the country. If you don't have a passport, if you can't go through the metal detector, making a very fundamental, rudimentary example now. But if you're not willing to tell us who you are, why should you be able to come into the country to maybe work with the vulnerable?
I mean, I quake with rage, I really do. So imagine this. So you've just said something really common sense. So imagine this. Tonight, when I go to bed, I'm going to leave all my windows open in the house. I'm going to leave all my doors open. I'm going to put signs up everywhere saying, come in, take the lot, destroy my life, rape, pillage, murder, by all means. Because if I don't do that, I'm a racist. So it's the level of psychological. I quake with rage, Mark. I really do. Yeah. Having control over your borders and essentially utilizing sovereignty. It's just nuts having to say all this sort of stuff, making sure that our faith, which is Christianity, is fostered, is protected, is taught in schools, making sure that we make very, very good decisions with regards to where we recruit from. Right now, Armenian Christians, the land of the oldest Christians, is being taken over and destroyed by Islamist Azerbaijan. The same thing has happened in Pakistan. The same thing is happening in Nigeria. The same thing is happening all across the world. with regards to pockets of Islamist terror cells, and the mainstream media don't talk about it. So if we're going to let anyone in, let's let the women and children in who are fleeing persecution by radical Islam, and let's watch and see how many members of the Islamic faith either tweet or post and in agreement with us saying, do you know what? Actually, we have got a problem with radical Islam, and we should have, in terms of open borders, we won't call the British public racist for wanting to import members of their faith, because this is a Christian land. So you see how disgustingly despicable the war is. If you don't form, and the vitriol that I've received over the last few days as a result, I don't know why now, because I've been doing what I've been doing for years, but people are so incensed that if you don't want mass uncontrolled immigration, if you don't want your home and your land to be invaded by foreign, unknown, medieval backward cultures and faiths, if you don't want that to happen, then you're a racist. So you yourself get smeared, whilst your legitimate concerns go completely unheard. And then you see, obviously, what you see, the spillover in the UK, where the 1% ruin it for everyone by doing X, Y, Z. And every sensible conservative commentator is, including Conservative Party members, they're saying it, and politicians, they're saying it, saying this is getting out of control because you're not listening to the people. And instead, you're demonizing them and looking to dehumanize by the weaponization of race and calling them a racist. It's disgusting.
It's absolutely disgusting. But even if we take all races and all religions out of it, and we just look at the incidents of Mark Teaton, who Lieutenant Colonel Mark Teaton, who was stabbed outside the Brompton barracks near Gillingham in his full uniform, and he was stabbed, what we've heard, up to about 60, 70 times. It was only his wife dragging the perpetrator off, a 24-year-old from reported Nigerian background, to the sickening, heartbreaking events in Southport. Now, obviously, this has dropped a lot of people in a lot of trouble because of what they've said. That's why we were very clear in another interview that we did with David Vance, who's a fantastic commentator from the right. We said we don't know who he is, we don't know his religion, but that's not really, we don't even have to talk about that. We could put that to the side and just say, look, knife crime, vulnerable children, and people coming into this country without any background checks. But what seems to be being used, like the clever barristers that they are, most of the Labour Party, they're all lawyers now anyway, and they're working as they were when they were in their chambers in the inns in London. They've gone for the narrative of attacking the likes of you and I and other channels, and Nigel Farage, let's throw him in there, by using the same tropes, the tired, boring tropes. But when you look at the Lord Chancellor, Miss Mahmood herself, she closed down a Sainsbury's back in 2014 by holding up a Palestinian flag and going on about the genocide in Palestine. So we are in for a rocky road ahead. But what's your advice to your UKIP followers and your followers on social media and people who may like to join UKIP or check you out? What's your advice to them?
So I think I'll link that to what you just said about Brompton Army Barracks and the Southport murderers, the 3 little girls there and the others who were injured. So you mentioned that we could potentially park all conversation about everything to do with anything and just focus on knife crime. And that's the common sense approach. The 17-year-old, I believe his name is Axel. Yes. He's being held. He's been remanded.
We have to be careful, of course. You know this, yes.
Yeah. Is that I believe that's been published. So yes. I don't know whether if it's been published, I presume it's fair game. Sure. So he's been remanded. Are we not concerned that there's no social media footprint about Axel? Are we not concerned that no healthcare worker, no family member, no student, no one knows anything about this guy? He was in a Doctor Who advert when he was about 10 years old, 7 years prior to the murders the other week. So there's no social media footprint about this guy. No one knows him. No one knows anything about him. No family members, nothing. A 17-year-old. in 2024,
Mm.
British born and bred, there's no footprint. Whereas if you work for Hope Not Hate, Nick Lowell's far left extremist organization, they will locate and they will find whoever you are, take pictures of you and your family and dox you to the world. The government and law enforcement know this. Think of I won't swear.
Individual.
This person who's done this to those 3 innocent lives. They know something about him. And we don't get to be told about it. The officer linking the point, the officer at the army barracks, no problem. The guy's probably got mental health issues, should be all over the news constantly. The mockery of the Last Supper at the Olympic Games should be all over the news endlessly. The nonsense doesn't stop. You mentioned 2 items there, and I want to link that to my message to UKIP. You linked 2 items. There are so many more items. You've got police liaison officers telling mobbed, masked up Islamist thugs carrying weapons to quote unquote go back to the mosque and drop your weapons. You've got Sky News being intimidated and harassed by Islamist thugs, and then they go try and slash the tires. We've all seen the footage. You got guys carrying swords. You got vigilante mob behavior. And then Keir Starmer, after seeing all of this, says there's 27.4 million to protect your mosques. Whilst in Plymouth on Monday, the far left stood at St Andrew's Church, hallowed ground in Plymouth, and tore the ground up, desecrated graves, and launched missiles at us. So the outrage and the analysis is literally too much to bear. So my message to UKIP is this. If you feel like you're being heard and you're being listened to by Reform, and if you think they're the savior that they make themselves out to be, go vote for them. My call, my battle cry is to the working class of Britain. It's the battle cry to the patriots and to the Christian communities of all different backgrounds, demographics, skin colors. It's to all those common sense, terrified mothers and fathers, re-knife crime, re-mass uncontrolled immigration, re-radical Islam, Marxism in our institutions. My battle cry is to those people who are not being listened to by any mainstream political party. I will be your voice and I will represent you and I will not stop fighting for you.
Well, Nick, thank you so much for coming on Herd Immunity News. I think you've probably summed it up perfectly there. We could talk for hours, you and I, no doubt about it, and I'm sure our followers and viewers, even if they are in Reform, we're not saying anything detrimental to anybody. We're opening up all debate, and when people listen to you, I'm pretty sure they'll want to go and check you out because you are actually out there. You are tiptoeing that line that Keir Starmer, that very thin red line that Keir Starmer's painted along the road for patriotic men and women to voice legitimate concerns about what's happening in our country. But we'll definitely have you back on. Thank you so much, Nick. You've been a breath of fresh air for a lot of people, and all power to you. We must say we're not personally in any political party here at Herd Immunity News, but we always recommend people to go and check out your work and your site, and we'll leave the links to you. But Nick Tenconi, thank you very much for coming on to Herd Immunity News.
Thanks so much, Mark. God bless. Thank you.